Gousha. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Upfront. It's not the top of the ticket, but the race for Wisconsin Attorney General has all the makings of a tough, competitive contest. Waukesha County District Attorney Brad Schimel, the Republican, faces off against Jefferson County DA Susan Happ, the Democrat. We had Susan Happ here for an extended interview 2 weeks ago, and today we're doing the same thing with the Republican candidate, Brad Schimel. Mr. DA, thanks very much for being with us again.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be here.
Well, there was a poll out last week, Marquette Law School poll, that sort of took the temperature of this race. But to me, the number that jumped out is that 3/4 of the people in this state really haven't been following this race. They don't really have an opinion of you or Sue Happ. So my question is, what are they going to learn about you in the next couple of months? What's going to be the message of the Schimel campaign?
They're going to learn that I'm the law enforcement choice in this race. I've got 85 elected sheriffs and district attorneys statewide, both Democrats and Republican sheriffs who are publicly endorsing me. I've got the endorsement of the Wisconsin Troopers Association, the Milwaukee Police Association. That's what they're going to learn. They're going to learn that I have nearly 25 years experience as a frontline prosecutor. And it's not just measured in the years of being there, but in accomplishments and leadership in my own county and statewide.
So is the distinction here your experience? You think you're the more experienced prosecutor than Susan Happ?
Well, I know I'm the more experienced prosecutor, but it's also more experienced leader. Those are both important things for the Attorney General's race.
Give me a sense of how you view this role. It is the top cop in the state. That's the term we like to attach to it. But what is your role, and how does it differ, for example, than how Susan Happ has talked about approaching this job?
Well, she hasn't talked very much about any specific plans for public safety, and Wisconsin has very serious public safety challenges in front of us. It's no time to have a leader who's going to learn while they earn. We have to have the leader of the state's law enforcement community with a plan to hit the ground running day one, and I have plans on all the different issues that are facing the state right now. And also, she's focusing very much on what she calls defending people's rights. And by that she means she's not going to defend Wisconsin's marriage amendment. She's not going to defend Wisconsin's voter ID law. She's going to use her environmental enforcement agency to try to obstruct the mining process up north. All of those things are wrong for Wisconsin, not on the issues themselves, but on the role of the Attorney General. And that's what I'm promising the people of Wisconsin. I will be their lawyer. I will defend the state's laws, and I will enforce the state's laws the way they're written. And honestly,
so you wouldn't, if you believed as an attorney that something might not pass constitutional muster, you would still defend the law anyhow?
Yes, because the job of the executive branch is not to interpret the law, it's to enforce the law. Legislature writes it, executive branch enforces it, and if it needs to be interpreted as to whether it's constitutional or not, that comes from the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin or the U.S. Supreme Court.
So voter ID, for instance, you would defend that law?
I will defend it until the Supreme Court gives us a determination as to whether this is legal.
And same-sex marriage ban, same thing?
Same thing. You know, the U.S. Supreme Court's going to have to decide that issue because we've got laws all around the country that they're not all identical, but they're similar enough in nature that the U.S. Supreme Court's going to have to decide whether the U.S. Constitution leaves the definition of marriage to the states under federalism or whether there are provisions in the U.S. Constitution that limit that for the states. That's a big decision, and it can't be decided by a district court judge in Madison.
I want to ask you about something that you said earlier and now I've talked about again recently, and that's the domestic partner registry law in this state. I think initially when you were asked about that, you said you wouldn't defend it, but now you say you would have defended it. Why the change in position?
You know, it was almost immediate. We were doing an interview, and we were talking about other issues, and the question kind of came out of left field. You know, my reaction was, well, the current Attorney General's not defending it. After that interview, I sat down, did some research, and, I found, wait a minute, this is not clearly unconstitutional. It doesn't clearly violate our state constitutional provision. My answer should be yes, and I immediately changed that position.
So her argument, as you may have seen on this program, is that she's going to protect the rights of the people of Wisconsin and imply that you and others would try to take away the rights of the people of Wisconsin. Your response to that?
She's got the job wrong. If she wants to be a legislator or a judge, she can run on those issues. But as the executive branch, as the Attorney General, the state's lawyer, your job isn't to make that call.
Let me touch on a couple of the big issues that I know are important to you and important in this race. Many people talk about the heroin epidemic in this state, and we've seen an explosion of heroin cases throughout the entire state. I want to get your sense of Waukesha County's been on the front lines of this. What would you do differently? What would you do that we're not currently doing to address this epidemic?
You know, one of the things we've got to do is we've got to amp up the training to local law enforcement and to prosecutors and amp up the resources to them. Because Waukesha County leads the state of Wisconsin in prosecuting what are called Len-bias homicides. If you deliver drugs to someone and they die, you can be charged with first-degree reckless homicide. We're leading the state on that because way back when I first was elected DA in 2006, I set out to make sure Waukesha County law enforcement, EMS were both trained up to be able to do competent investigations, to put the prosecution together, and that our prosecution team was ready to handle them. That hasn't been replicated in every community in the state. We've got to do that. And DOJ is probably going to have to handle a lot of those cases for smaller agencies, for smaller DA's offices, but we've got to make that resource available.
Give me a sense of the drunk driving, your take on the drunk driving issue. Both you and Susan Happ do not favor making a first offense drunk driving citation a crime. Right. Which some people do in this state. Again, state your reasons for not thinking that should be a crime.
Well, actually, and I've served on the District Attorneys Association Executive Board now, and this has been the position of the WDAA, District Attorneys Association, that the legislature needs to do the homework. Find out if we've moved public safety forward in the other states by making first offense OWI a crime. If it has, then Wisconsin should think about doing this.
But you need to see evidence. That's what you want to see evidence before you say, I would support something like that.
It's expensive. You know, every biennium, the legislature considers doing this. And every biennium, they get the fiscal note and they back away because ultimately they haven't seen the evidence either.
I hear you, though, leaving the door open a little bit there. If you can be convinced that there's data that suggests this might be a smart move.
Absolutely.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Republican candidate for Attorney General Brad Schimel. We'll talk about gun laws and talk about the state of the race. We'll be back. Come back to Upfront in our extended interview with the Republican candidate for Attorney General Brad Schimel. I want to talk about gun laws for just a moment. The chief of police in Milwaukee, as you know, violent crime problem here that we're still combating. He said it would make my job a little bit easier if we were able to get tougher on felons who possess firearms in this state. Right. Is there a role for the Attorney General on that? What do you think about that statement?
I do, and let me tell you one thing I'm very proud of is having the endorsement of the Milwaukee Police Association, because the officers working on the front lines of this very big problem have expressed their confidence that I'm best able to lead the state's law enforcement community to help them with this problem. You know, there are a couple things we need to do. One of them is not to make tougher gun laws that make it more difficult for law-abiding gun owners. They're not the problem here. The problem are the criminals, and we've got to enforce the laws we have. Part of the problem is the Milwaukee DA's office has been neglected in its staffing issues, and they can't keep up. They're buried. They've got 50% of the violent crime in Wisconsin, but far fewer than 50% of the
So they need help in terms of numbers, money, all of that?
They do. We've got to work to take out the gang members that are an awful big part of this. But those are big cases. They're conspiracies that I'm going to take assistant attorneys general from the Department of Justice in the criminal litigation unit. We're going to use them to help Milwaukee County prosecute those cases effectively. We're going to take our Division of Criminal Investigation officers, have them help the Milwaukee Police Department put those cases together. And we can take those people out of the community. Those neighborhoods can start feeling safe again, and those officers can get home safe at night, too.
You were asked in an interview in the spring about the role of Attorney General, and you said one of the things that was important to you was protecting the sovereignty of the sstate against the overreach of the federal government.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we've seen in recent months there have been 13 9-0 U.S. Supreme Court decisions against this federal administration. That speaks very loudly that they're overreaching, that they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And that is, when the checks and balances in D.C. aren't working, the state attorney general is the last line of defense. For instance, on June 2nd, the EPA announced new regulations for carbon dioxide emissions from power plants. Well, if those are able to go into effect the way they are, there's not a single coal-powered plant in Wisconsin that will survive. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has estimated this is going to cost Wisconsin hundreds of thousands of jobs if those go into effect. the AG is going to have to be involved in making sure that those rules don't disproportionately harm Wisconsin.
Susan Happ has said that, she will look at the laws one by one. She'll decide which ones to defend based on whether or not she thinks she's constitutional. You said you'll follow the letter of the law. There are going to be people out there. There are people critical of her stance on this, but they may be critical of yours and have said, Brad Schimel would be a rubber stamp for a Republican-controlled legislature and possibly a Republican governor. What do you say to people who make that criticism?
Well, I don't like the term rubber stamp, but, honestly, I'll be pretty predictable no matter who is running the governor's mansion or who's running the legislature. I'll be pretty predictable. If they've passed that law through and it's not plainly unconstitutional, that there are non-frivolous arguments to be made to support the law, I will be supporting that law no matter who's passing it.
Two quick questions to wrap things up. You've got a financial advantage right off the bat. How soon are we going to be seeing Brad Schimel ads on the airwaves around Wisconsin?
It's going to be a few weeks yet for that because honestly, $500,000 buys about 3 weeks worth of ads, and you can't start and then fall off and not continue it. So, we're still working to raise money, and we aren't going to be able to run ads continuously for 8 weeks like the governor's campaigns are doing.
And I have to give you a chance. One of the things talked about with Susan Happ was the motorcycle riding commercial where she's on a Harley. But you're a Harley rider, too. We just want to go state on the record. You're a Harley enthusiast.
Yeah, I got my first my Heritage in 1992. I got my current bagger in 94. And, I spent 7 years as a road captain with the Kettle Moraine chapter.
See, another area of agreement for the two of you. So, Brad Schimel, the Republican candidate for Attorney General in the state of Wisconsin. It's good to have you back on the program.
Thank you, Mike.
You bet. Next.